And I think you get your prompt now. Right. So, like, thank you again for joining us today. And we have Susan here with us that would be letting us in on all the things we need to know about publishing, the career field, how to break into it, and what we need to know. So, the idea is if you have questions after introducing Susan and after Susan just giving her background, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or unmute yourself if you want to. And we would just, that's typically what we would do. If you have questions, feel free to ask. And while you're asking, I also have some questions prepared that I've heard students like ask over the years and stuff. So I would be asking those questions as well. Does that sound good? All right, so we have Susan here with us, and Susan is an executive editor for American and World History at Oxford Press in New York, where she has worked since 1997. Her list ranges from ancient history to contemporary history and includes both academic and trade titles. She has edited many first books as well as the work of senior scholars. Books she has edited have won numerous prizes, including many society awards, the National Book Award, Fort Lisa Award prizes, Bancroft prizes, and a Los Angeles Times Book Prize. And 5 have been national bestsellers. She enjoys working with scholars, helping them to attain tenure and to make their ideas accessible to wider audiences. In addition to speaking regularly about publishing at universities and scholarly conferences, she wrote on editing scholarly work in What Editors Do, University of Chicago Press, 2018, and teaches aspiring publishing professionals every year at the Columbia Publishing course. So everyone with your clap, if you want to clap or mute, or if you want to use a reaction, join me and welcome Susan. Susan, it's really great to have you here.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you all for coming today. I know you have other things to do on a Thursday afternoon, and at least here in New York, it's a beautiful, beautiful day. We haven't had spring before, so it's really hard to sit in front of a computer inside.
All right. So Susan, can you just like give us a background of yourself, how you started? I think that's like a good segue to just start, and so from there we can have questions and build upon our questions.
Sure. So I started in publishing. I know it, like when the year is given, it sounds like a lifetime ago, and it kind of was, but I don't feel like it's been also very long since I tried to get into publishing, and that was a long-term attempt with a lot of things that did not go right, and then finally something did go right, and I got a job. I am someone who got into publishing after leaving graduate school. I did not get a PhD. Most of the people I work with do not have advanced degrees. In fact, I would say an advanced degree sometimes can be a negative. But I am someone who got into the field in the ways that most entry-level people in publishing do, which is starting at the bottom rung in an entry-level job. I spent many months applying for said entry-level job, both in New York, all over New York, also in Boston, where I had been living shortly before. And I applied for jobs of every type. I applied for romance publishers, I applied for reference publishers, medical publishers, the big trade publishers, academic presses, you name it. If there was an entry-level job, I just applied for it because it was really hard to get that first job. And I was very lucky that somebody decided to make an offer to me. And I knew I was lucky because I had gone through this experience for long enough to think, if only I had the chance, if someone would teach me, I'm like willing to work really hard and to learn this industry. And it's an industry that's filled with a lot of apprenticeship kind of roles. So these entry-level jobs aren't just doing work for whatever the job description says, but also seeing how people in the positions above me were actually doing the job and where I could potentially grow to. So to learn about sales, to learn about marketing, to learn about subsidiary rights, which I had never even heard of, things like translations or film deals, production, like who actually edits the books, like what does all of this mean, cover designers, all the kinds of people that go into working in publishing, and there are more than that. So I really wanted to be in a position to learn. I didn't even know exactly where I wanted to be, and that was the thing that was most interesting, is to learn about what all of these different people do and how all of them come together to make books, and also electronic products and other kinds of things that are in the publishing world. I had looked a little bit at magazines, but I wasn't hugely interested in magazines. I was really much more interested in books. And I ended up getting a job at a university press, which means essentially that I work in the publishing arm. I'm part of a department of a university. So, you know, a lot of presses around the United States are part of their universities, and they have kind of different relationships. They're in some way related to it. They're owned by it. They may work within the library. The press may be owned by the library, or it could be a different arrangement, but they're very critical to the world of academia. So most of the authors at university or academic presses are actually scholars, and they may write books for a wider audience than scholars. They may write textbooks for students. They might write trade books for a general audience. But the idea of university presses is that they are part of the scholarly conversation. So that, to me, has been an absolutely essential part of my career, because what I do is work with people like your professors, but I also work with, you know, a set of people in an industry to get ideas out to a community beyond that.
Thank you, Suzanne. I don't know about you all. I think I started taking notes just from the background Suzanne shared. I had a lot of things to pen down already because I'm also here and learning, right? So at this point, if you have questions, feel free to put that in the chat, and I would read that out, and Suzanne would be kind enough to answer our questions. So feel free to put your questions in the chat, and then we will get to that. But let's just moving forward. Suzanne, I think one thing that is prevalent right now is the pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. So one thing we would love to know, I particularly would love to know, is how has the pandemic affected or influenced the publishing industry?
So there are a couple of different ways. The first thing I guess I should say is everybody, like when last March hit and, you know, there was just chaos and people were like, oh my God, nothing's going to work. Nobody's going to buy our books. Amazon, for a period of time, it was about a month and a half, stopped buying books so that they could stock up on toilet paper and household needs. And then since that's like the biggest account for every single publisher now, everybody was in a panic, like what's going to happen to us? In fact, 2020 ended up being like the best publishing year in terms of sales in over a decade. So it's an industry that nobody could exactly figure out how it all works, but it perpetually is thought that it's going down the drain, and it perpetually becomes like a really vibrant industry. Everybody who had kids who were home from school and were trying to find enrichment, those people were buying books. People who were really exhausted from reading on screens, they were buying books. People who wanted to learn how to bake sourdough bread, they were buying books. People who, you know, really thought that what they wanted was just to escape, they were buying novels like you wouldn't believe. People who were interested in the election, everything that was going on with Donald Trump, they were buying books. So there was a lot of different engagements with the world of books in ways that at this time last year, I would not have predicted. So that's been one aspect of the pandemic. For me, I think most directly, authors often have a lot of excuses for not turning their books in on time, or turning anything in like on deadline. I know they want your papers on time, but they are very, very bad at turning in books on time, like by years. Like most people are off by like not just a month or two, but years. So suddenly my authors couldn't travel anywhere, and they couldn't go to conferences. They couldn't go on summer vacation, and people sat down and did their work, which like I was surprised. I mean, people were distracted, of course, but you know, a lot of people sat down and were like, the thing I care most about is this book that's under contract. And so I started getting manuscripts in from people, you know, at rates that I wasn't expecting. And my list this year and next year are going to be double the size of their usual. And by list, I mean the books that I publish in a year that are the ones I edit. That's my list. So that was very unexpected. I think what we've seen in the world of retail is a lot of, you know, bookstores are just, they're closed, or they have curbside pickup. So this has not been a great time for small businesses in the United States in general, and booksellers are part of that. You know, this is a time that has very much privileged anybody who does, you know, online delivery. The faster, the better. So Amazon has been doing very, very well with selling books, like everything else. Independent booksellers, up and down. A lot of places have closed. it's been a very frustrating time, and I really hope that that world comes back and that there's foot traffic. I think in the world of publicity for books, it's opened up a whole new world for a lot of people. It used to be if you were a big time author, let's say, you know, it didn't have to be Stephen King kind of level, but, you know, if you had a brand new novel and you were at a big house, they would tour you, which essentially means like go out and speak at bookstores or events all over the country. And they would pick out, you know, a certain number of cities. And this was a very expensive thing, but people did it to promote fiction and nonfiction, but only of authors of a certain level that they were really trying to push. And of course, nobody could go anywhere. And not only couldn't they go anywhere, they couldn't get any audiences in person. So this whole world of book selling and sort of big book PR has moved online. I know that any day of the week I could watch, you know, an author pretty much every single night, somebody I'd be interested in. And that's not just at, let's say, PALS in, you know, in the Pacific Northwest or Politics and Prose in Washington, D.C., but booksellers all over the country are doing these events. And so that's been a really interesting phenomenon. And my guess is that even after, you know, the worst of the pandemic has passed, a lot of these places will say, we get huge audiences, which they do. You know, nobody realizes they have to get in their car and like drive someplace and like make room in their schedule. All of a sudden they can watch their favorite author on their phone. So I think that that's going to be a continuing trend. Anyway, there are even more effects. For a while, there was a hiring freeze at most publishers, but that's ended. Places are replacing staff. And I think that, you know, who gets replaced and, you know, when that happens varies. But definitely I see entry-level positions opening and people getting hired.
Thank you so much. I like how you touched like the different areas and aspects where the pandemic is affected. And the last point is what I'm excited about, that hiring freeze has ended, right? So students can go out there and there are opportunities available for students. Thank you so much. And I think for one, personally, it was this year or when the whole pandemic hit, that was when I started reading more books. So I think I helped the publisher as well
Thank you.
All right, so there's a question here in the chat, and it's from Christian. It says, I'm graduating with a master's in English literature this May. Congratulations in advance. Well, how might an advanced degree be a hindrance to getting a publishing job? How can you tailor your resume to work around that and make yourself more marketable to entry-level jobs? So now I think there are two questions here. The first part is, how might an advanced degree be a hindrance to getting a publishing job? Do you want to start with that one? And
sure.
Then, all right.
I don't actually think a master's is a hindrance. I was thinking more along the lines of someone who's done a PhD for 8 or 9 years, let's say, or has done like the whole course, you know, from and has not held a job oftentimes like outside of academia. And I think the people who are making career switches from like the alt-ac career from a PhD struggle much more than people with masters. So I wouldn't worry about, you know, having a master's and thinking that that will close doors. I don't think that's the case. I do think though there are ways of tailoring the cover letter and resume, because I suspect that what you're most proud of, like for all the right reasons, is what you have done your master's thesis on and what you've been taking courses on. And I would think much more, and you probably are already doing this, about the ways in which you can market the skills and the traits that you have developed as somebody doing that degree and what that can do for the publisher. So things like problem solving and communication skills and being able to read things and synthesize, like all of those kinds of skills are things that in publishing and many other jobs too are really, really valuable. And they'll care much more about that than, let's say, you know, analyzing Jane Austen or a particular novel that you may have been writing on, or any of the other skills. Now, if this is a job at a place that's a literary publisher, particularly, let's say, a poetry society, and your degree is a master's in poetry, then that may be quite different, because that specialized knowledge may be exactly what they're looking for. But I think in general, for these cover letters, enthusiasm obviously is something that you should always have when you're applying for a job, but thinking about what a publisher might need. And a lot of it, and I hate to say this because it's true of most industries, it's thinking about what the employer might need rather than the ways in which your academic training has led you to a specialty. So being broad-minded and also curious. I mean, no matter what you've read in literature, working in making new literature is going to be different. And it's going to be different in thinking about, let's say, markets and how market share works, or about publicity, or the ways in which these different parts of the industry interact, which is really different than sometimes I'm thinking about the ultimate product of the book.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope that answered your question, Christine. Okay. Right. So there's another question here. I'm loving this. Right. Many of the publishers, this is from Meredith, many of the publishers are in New York City or in the Northeast. Is the industry going more virtual with these positions, with the positions?
That's a really good question. It's one that I wish I had a crystal ball, and like 5 years from now, I could answer this question really, really well. So people are like in a like an in-between period right now at a lot of different publishers, not just the one I work at. So you're right, there are a lot of publishers in New York. There are definitely a lot focused in the Northeast. There are publishers on the West Coast. Anyway, there are publishers all over the country, but you're right in terms of the consolidation, like geographically being heavily in the Northeast. Many people that I work with, particularly entry level or junior staff, when the pandemic hit New York and things were bad, a lot of them went to live with their parents or their family, or moved back to where they were from and didn't stay in New York. Now, for the time being, this is completely possible because everybody is working remotely. There are all sorts of tax implications of this, about like where the company is established and what's going to happen with tax return filing. And there are certain states you can live in that, you know, the company might be based in. So there's a complicated set of things that I can't actually give any guidance on whatsoever, except that every publisher is going to have some version of that situation. I see jobs advertised now that say, I wouldn't say that they are like location anywhere, because I think most publishers are expecting at some point to be able to reopen their doors and for people to be back in a building together. And I think the community aspect of working in publishing is what a lot of people really enjoy. Like, you have smart, interesting colleagues, and people get along in general, you know, and want to learn from each other. So I think it's going to be a very like fluid situation through, let's say, the next year or so, because there are people who are being hired who are working from home with the expectation that they will later be in an office. At least the company I work at has multiple offices. One of them is in North Carolina. Another one is in Canada. Somebody can be hired and it can be working out of North Carolina for somebody based in New York. And I see that happening a fair bit right now. I can't actually think of very many assistants who have gotten hired who are in the New York area. The ones that I've noticed, the new introductions, they're all living somewhere in the South. So I don't know what that's going to mean 2 years from now. I don't know that it will be a situation where anybody can get hired and, let's say, can live in Arkansas and just like work from home, never having been at the company. But I think every publisher is in this situation right now, like a lot of other employers. So I would look really carefully at the job ads. They may be a little more specific. I've definitely seen some job ads saying, like, for now, work from home or remote working, with an expectation later of being in such and such office. But I think that this is the whole world of work is changing right now. And I can't say for sure that you'll be able to just live anywhere and be able to work in publishing. But I also want to stress that there are some real advantages to being together with a group of people in the publishing industry. Because as I was saying, it's an apprenticeship in a lot of ways. And if I hadn't gotten to have those sort of early career experiences where I could just walk to somebody's desk and be like, hey, I don't know how to do this, can you show me? I feel like I wouldn't be a very good editor. And it's a lot of work to train people remotely. So I'm not directly involved in that right now, but I see all of these people starting, and I'm definitely like involved in some of the social things. Like, we have Zoom, like getting to know you type events, which are, you know, it's okay, but it's not quite the same as being able to say, I just met these great people that work down the hall from me, and like, this is why I wanted to get into this industry, to meet people like that. So I hope that helps a little bit.
All right. Okay, so I think, speaking of locations, what I would ask as a follow-up is, and this might also be interest for other people, right? Is it that are the jobs, publishing jobs, are they just located in New York, or are they just predominantly there? Are there other locations where students can possibly look at for jobs in publishing?
I mean, all over.
Okay.
So many universities, so I'll talk about university press, I'll talk about commercial presses. There are university presses all over the country. I mean, there's more than 100 of them. You know, they're in New Mexico, they're in California, they are in Tennessee, they're in Kentucky, they're in North Carolina, they're all over the place. So, and Chicago is another sort of hub of other kinds of publishing too. There are medical publishers, there are law publishers, but when you're talking about the kinds of, like for pleasure reading, if you pick something up and it's Simon and Schuster or HarperCollins or, um, you know, Random House, those are all based in New York City. But that's a pretty rarefied world. Like it's been called the Big Five because there really are only five of them. And it may be four because Penguin and Random House merged and now there's Simon and Schuster and Random House might merge. So if you're talking just about that kind of publisher, yeah, New York is the kind of literary hub. But there are lots of different types of publishing as well. And I think that's something I wasn't naive about, but I didn't know as much about. And I kind of wish I had. Medical publishing pays a lot better than academic publishing. People who work on legal publishing, you know, books that are for professional, like for professional working lawyers, not just, you know, sort of a trade book about law, those places are also like much more lucrative jobs than academic publishing or trade publishing. So I think there are different types of things all over the place. And there are also independent presses, which are small, not academic presses. They, things like Tin House, so they can often be much more literary kinds of presses. They might do fewer books a year. So there are definitely independent presses in like the Minneapolis, St. Paul area, in the Pacific Northwest. Anyway, they're spread out. So I don't think that there should ever be the feeling of publishing is only in one place. I mean, it's also international, by the way, but you know, your visas and your citizenship may not allow you to actually publish, you know, and work internationally. I certainly can't just pick up and say I'd much rather like work in London, so let me just move. But you know, I think seeing New York as the only option, it can be a little bit of a mistake. There's a lot of competition for those jobs. You know, you can have 300 applicants for a single entry-level job in New York, but there are also, you know, jobs at the University of Texas Press, for instance, and they don't have quite as many people who are sort of like looking at those jobs. So I would think about where you're from, where you want to live, what kinds of books you enjoy or think you might enjoy. If you're someone who loves comic books or manga, like things can be done in other places. So you know, you can definitely look, and where you start isn't necessarily where you end up either.
All right, thank you. Thank you for clearing that up. That New York is not like the only place, it's everywhere. Thank you. So there's a question right here in the chats from Sarah, and it says that if someone has not yet secured a full-time job upon graduation, would you suggest just moving to the area they're interested in working in and hope to eventually get in their field of interest? Or would you suggest securing a job in their field of interest before moving and making that commitment? I can take the question again on.
Oh, that's a biggie. Well, it depends how much money you have, I guess, to start with. Like, I wouldn't feel all that comfortable picking up and moving in the middle of a pandemic with zero income, unless I had money saved. But that's me. I'm not that much of a risk taker. Also, you can do other kinds of work, you know, while you're looking for a job in the industry you really want. But I also realize we're talking about a time where like waiting tables or working at Starbucks, like these things are not quite as open and available as they might have been, you know, in a non-pandemic period. So I think that, you know, temping is one thing my sister did a lot of before she actually got a full-time job. And, you know, she went where she was needed, but that was also when offices were open and were like hiring temps. So I err on the side of caution, and I definitely say ask career services, but also your family and friends. Like if you're going to be sharing an apartment with people and you can like make an affordable move, great. But I wouldn't do that and then like a year later not be employed and then think I really want to be in publishing, but I can't get a job, and here I am stuck in this place and I can't get an entry-level job.
Thank you. All right, moving on. What are some of like the most important skill set that you say is needed in this field?
So the reason that's a good question is there are a lot of different types of people in publishing, and there are a lot of different skills that are needed. So I'm an editor, and what I love is being able to read and work on texts and being able to work with authors to develop ideas that will turn into books. I also really love design stuff, but I'm not a professional designer. So I work with people who have usually art degrees and are professional cover designers, and also in some cases professional interior like text designers. What they need is a skill set is totally different from what I need as a skill set. The people who work in sales and marketing are absolutely like experts in the whole world of social media marketing and all of the different techniques that they have learned over time, which I gather include, and I don't actually know what this is called, but they use software where they can see exactly how long people are looking at parts of a page, like which elements of a book page, like on Amazon, people are looking at for the longest, what colors their eyes are attracted to, what's working with an ad if it's green and not working if it's, yellow. That's a different set of skills from the ones I have. I could care less if I can compose a really fantastic set of tweets and a social media campaign, because it's not what I do and it's not what I enjoy doing. The people who work in public relations or the sort of the publicity PR department, their skill set is in being able to concisely describe what a book is and pitch it and get to know what the media in a local, national, and international scene mean. So that can be book review editors, that can be podcasters, that can be, TV producers, that can be radio, anyway, a whole variety of things. So the skills they need are different from the ones that I have. The people who work in like financial analysis and publishing, they're really important. Don't ask me what they do. Like they crunch numbers, they know how to do all kinds of complicated things with spreadsheets and data analysis. I don't get it, but they really get it. And so we need people who are like that. The people who are in subsidiary rights are the people who are involved in taking book projects or intellectual property and licensing them. So they license to foreign publishers, so having foreign language skills, incredibly important for them. People who work with TV and film licensing, again, not something I do, but my books do actually get licensed sometimes. They also are the people who are dealing with audiobook publishers. And they are people who are thinking about how can we take what has come out in one form and create a different form of it. So how can we like leverage that for more money? They're also the same people. If you watch Jeopardy and you see at the end that it says like Oxford dictionaries are the source, they're the same people who do that. Or if you have, an iPhone or any other like phone that has a dictionary that's attached to it, if you are seeing on there that like Oxford English Dictionary is like one of the primary sources of information and knowledge, that's because somebody I work with licensed it. So they have a different skill set. And then there are people who are managers. I don't want their skill set, but they're actually ones who know how to construct departments and work with people to bring the best out of them, and also to make hard decisions about budgets and about what things should be emphasized and what things should be de-emphasized. So I'm vastly simplifying what a manager's job is, but I have no interest in managing other people. And I work with people who actually care about that. So it takes a lot of different skills in publishing. I know it probably seems like reading a lot is a good idea. And I think, yeah, in general, liking the kinds of things that a publisher is doing, that's important. Because I didn't get the job at the romance publisher, just to give the spoiler alert on that story. I went into a job interview because it looked like a good job, and a friend of mine, I think her mother-in-law published with that publisher, and somehow or another, even though I really have no connections, that person was like, here, we'll get you an interview. And I don't read romance novels. I'm not particularly attuned to the marketplace for romance novels. I did research beforehand, but I'm the wrong person for that. And it probably became very obvious, even though I was as keen as could be and to demonstrate that I had done research. I also realized that there are jobs that I seemed perfectly suited for, it was my ideal job, and I didn't even get an interview. So I think being open and curious and willing to learn are probably the most important skills to have going in. But I say that knowing that 2 years into a job, if you feel like you're at a sort of crossroads and you're not really loving it, but then you've got skills. Then you can shift laterally into something, or you can move companies, but you have experience. And that's probably the thing in publishing that helps most, is like gaining experience and be able to take those skills and say, here's how I can apply it to something else.
Right. Thank you for all of that. And I think from your answer, one of my question was, but before I ask the question, I wanted to say that I think I already got the answer, but I'm just going to ask it. Is that so? It means that not only English majors can succeed in publishing.
Definitely not. So I hope there are people here today who are not just English majors. I have nothing against English majors. I myself had an interdisciplinary background that included literature. We need people who know science. We need people who can understand math. We need people who can understand like really technical subjects. Those are often the hardest jobs to recruit for. And sometimes that can be those can be really important and interesting work. So one of the things that my company does has an entire medical division. I don't really understand anything about when I look at those books, but what I do understand, and this wasn't just true this past year, that the authors they worked with had cutting edge knowledge about coronaviruses and about all kinds of other things that doctors, nurses, people in the medical community need. And that if their books don't come out on time and get regularly updated, like it actually does affect people's lives. Whereas if my history book is 5 years late, nobody cares. But, you know, I look at these fields and think what we need are people who are interested often in translating. So, you know, and I don't just mean like from a foreign language, you know, if you're somebody who's working, let's say in a medical department or a science, you know, publisher or any place else, you're translating the work of specialists to make it comprehensible to the audience for those books. And that can be specialists, that can be professionals, that can be the lay public, you know, like sort of public health type books, or consumer health, the kind of things that you would pick up because somebody in your family has a disease and you're trying to understand, like, what should I know about breast cancer? So I think there's a lot of really, really important work to be done by people who aren't just English majors in publishing, but we also take English majors too.
Yeah, all right. Thank you for explaining that. There's another question here in the chat. It's from Jacob. It says, are there major differences between journal magazine publishers and book publishers in terms of types of jobs?
Yeah, so I'm not particularly an expert on magazine publishers. My sister happens to work at one. My sister and I are completely opposite individuals. So she works in advertising. Publishing doesn't have like an advertising wing, like in book publishing. So one of the things that she does is get all of these companies that place ads in the middle of magazines. And apparently it's really important, like what page you're on and how much space you have. And you get a lot more money if you have like those perfume, like things that tear out, or those ads that open like in three-way folds. I don't totally understand this, but these like advertisers spend thousands and thousands of dollars every year from, you know, in magazines to convince people to buy stuff. Most books that you open have no advertisements in them. So that's already a big difference there. In terms of the jobs, I think there's the creative side of magazine publishing. That is the people who write copy. So their names are usually not in the magazine. You know, it's all anonymous. They have a very different relationship with visuals. So a lot of those, it's about photography and about what kinds of placement things are on the page. There might be, you know, 50 words of text, but, you know, a whole spread of different images. So photography is a really important thing in magazine publishing. Magazines obviously have a different focus. Most of them come out 12 issues a year. And there's a lot of pressure around when they call them books, but they're really not books, are they? You know, they're things that people read and then they recycle. So I don't consider that a book, but they call it a book in magazines. And the books have very important deadlines every year, every month of the year. So the holiday issues, there's a lot of stress around that. And you know, in the fashion industry world, the magazines like Vogue, you know, the September issue is like double the size of all the others. So there's a different kind of calendarization. As for what the jobs are, I'm not great at that, but there'll be a title called publisher, there's a CEO, and there are all these department heads. And then there are a lot of assistants. So that's in itself kind of like book publishing. We have a lot of different departments, there's hierarchy, but there's a way of moving up. And also people move between magazines. So, you know, there's not that many big publishers out there. Hearst is one of them. There are a few others, and they own huge families of magazines. So if you start in one, and let's say you're not crazy about bicycling, but you're really crazy about home crafts, and Real Simple has a job, like you can take your skill set and transfer it to a different magazine publisher. I would say magazine publishing, probably more than book publishing, is a kind of New York centric industry. There are other places that publish magazines, but that's very, very New York based. That's the best I can do on magazines. I'm like, a lot of this is gleaned from my sister and from some people that I know in that industry. Also, they dress better, like way better. Like fashion and like what they wear and appearance is way more important than magazine publishing. I could go to work, I won't say in my pajamas, but you know, it's not quite as fancy a world in book publishing. We don't have a huge number of perks. So there's no like soul cycle sessions that are like just given away for, you know, book publishers in general. So, but magazine world is a lot more status oriented, I would say. And I'm not denigrating it. Like there are people that's the world they want to live in. I'm just not one of them. And I'm very happy working with people who are not well known. Like I don't need to have celebrities in my life, but every magazine that you open pretty much has a celebrity on the cover. So there are some fairly big differences. But if you watch Younger on TV, like the world of book publishing also really doesn't look like that either. Like you would think that wearing high fashion every single day is book publishing from that show, but that's really not the case.
Thank you. I like the fact that you ended with Younger, because I was gonna ask. I heard about it and I had to watch it before today's event. So I was gonna ask, what are like the misconceptions that we see on TV? Like what are things that we see on TV that you know that they're probably exaggerated or they're not true, right?
Oh, interesting. So there are a lot of movies about publishing, and there have been TV shows other than Younger. And I used to be very obsessed with all these because I thought this was one way I could learn about this industry, because I knew nobody who worked in book publishing. And I did information interviews, but like it wasn't anybody that I knew. I literally knew not a single person who had made a career with books. But for some reason, I got it in my head that this was really, really what I wanted to do. And I guess one thing I think about a lot is it always looks like it's moving really fast. You know, you have to get it in an episode or like a 2-hour movie. Book publishing is much more slow and methodical, and it's not particularly dramatic most of the time. I could spend years working on a book. Like nobody sees all of the time that goes in behind the scenes. And also there are all of these different roles that are not very glamorous. I mean, like really, really not glamorous. I look at like lists of ISBNs on spreadsheets, like in Excel for chunks of the day, because I have to read things and look at what's going to go into a campaign. And like that would make for terrible TV. I mean, it would be so boring. I think about the launch parties that are often shown, you know, the sort of big things to announce. And I think I've been to like 4 of those over my entire career. And like one of them was at the Library of Congress, which was great, but like it's not exactly like they rented out City Island or something. So I think that it doesn't make for very big excitement to see people just sitting and reading. And there are chunks of my day where I'm just sitting and reading. The other parts of the job that it's going to sound weird, but you're told in college not to plagiarize anything, of course. Like you don't take other people's words and just adopt them as your own. But in publishing, one of the things that you have to do is learn how to read stuff, synthesize it, sometimes using the author's words or maybe some other like copy that's been written. And it's all a group project. Like it's never your words all alone. Like there's always a collaboration. And so that kind of collaboration is really never shown. It always looks like a genius editor like just did all of this on their own, or like an author was just brilliant and they walked in and their book just became a bestseller. It's just not how it happens. Like there's a huge amount of collaboration, and all of the work that the sales team does to prepare and create a successful campaign. Like that's 9 months before the book comes out or more. The marketers are working 6 months in advance. So a lot of the stuff behind the scenes to make things happen is slow, and often, you know, it would just be the kind of day-to-day work that is going on in a continuous way for many books, not just one book. Like you're working on a whole bunch of books all the time. So there's never just this moment where everything's done. I sometimes, you know, romanticize the end of a college semester. I do this all the time, actually, because what I loved was that feeling where September was like a fresh start and you got like new courses and suddenly like it was just a whole new set of things. And in May or whenever your semester ends, like those things finish and you feel a sense of accomplishment because they're done and then you're doing something else. I never feel starts and finishes anymore. It's just a rolling set of all different things happening. And sometimes an author can do something one day that everything on my to-do list is like thrown out the window because I have to then deal with an emergency. So I feel like it's the multitasking and the boring behind the scenes stuff that makes exciting things, you know, happen in the long run.
Yeah, I think I like the explanation about the fact that it's not always fast, right? It takes time. But in movies and TV shows, of course, we just see them going as first. I'm like, oh yeah, I think this is this is how it should be. All right. Okay, so I want us to talk about jobs, and it would be where can students find jobs? It would be how can they like break into the field? It would be what are like the typical entry level jobs and like the titles, and just talk about job search and all of that.
Sure. So I'm so old that my job search began with like help wanted ads in newspapers, which don't exist anymore. So obviously everything online is the way that this search is going to go for you. You know, that there will be job things that will be posted on LinkedIn from some companies. There will be, you know, places that aggregate publishing jobs. There are two that I particularly recommend. One is something called Publishers Lunch, which you can sign up for. It's a free newsletter, 5 days a week, which gives a roundup of industry news. There's an unpaid subscription. I only get the unpaid subscription. And they have something called Publishers Marketplace, where they take postings from various companies for entry-level positions. So that's the first place that I would look. I think it's a little more New York centric probably, but I haven't gone through every job ad there. The other one is the Association of University Presses, which I believe is aupnet.org. Anyway, Association of University Presses also posts entry level just for university presses. And they separate them into categories, you know, production and editorial and sales and marketing. So you can see what's going on there. There's not as many postings, but they're always do entry level. You can sign up on publishers' websites to have alerts when new jobs are open, or you can do an application even before a job is open. For many places, you can go on and look, and then there's sort of like a pre-registration type thing before you upload something about a specific job. So you can get on some of those sites and take a look. And that's, I know it's very diffuse to do that. Like it literally means going to all these different websites, but places that don't want to spend money advertising especially will just post stuff on their own websites. You have no idea when a job is going to open. You have no idea where they are in the process. You know, literally they can open something and maybe they had an internal candidate, but maybe they don't. But I think that that's a really important thing to do because every publisher will have its own presence there and they don't all spend money or get things out to, you know, monster.com or anything like that.
Yeah. Thank you. I think another thing is what are like the common like entry level titles, like job titles? What's something I want to do?
They'll all have assistant with them. So it'll be publishing assistant, marketing assistant, editorial assistant, sales assistant, rights assistant. I think there's, you know, I didn't even talk about agents. There are literary agencies. You can also look for entry-level jobs there, and that will be like assistant literary agency. And what literary agents are sort of like middlemen to the publishing world. So they take on clients and then they sell those clients' work to publishers. But it's a really good place to learn about what is out there and what's being done and how they're pitched. Legal assistant, every publisher has a legal department. They're all growing because we have so many more legal issues than we ever did. So anything that has assistant would be the thing to look for. Some of them might have something called administrative assistant, but I think in general, it will be obvious which the entry level ones are, because there will be like a no time required in industry kind of description with it. I think in terms of getting experience though, internships can be very valuable, and some of those are going on remotely. In fact, I would say a lot of those are going on remotely. I have no idea what it would be like to be a remote intern, because again, I really do feel like my hands-on was so much more important to me. But everybody is doing them, and my colleagues are certainly hosting interns throughout the year. I wouldn't be picky about what department. I wouldn't even be picky about which publisher, because it's experience. And then when you apply for a job, you can say I had 2 or 3 months or whatever it is, interning or getting to know this. I think, that often teaches people, if they do not want to be in the industry, without then spending an enormous amount of money on a job search. I know people who, spent a year in publishing as an assistant and were completely miserable. They were like, wait, I thought I was going to read great literature, and I thought I was going to edit a book, and I thought I was going to like go out and get my own books, and that's not at all the way it looks, in entry level. And had they done an internship, I think they would have realized that in some cases, temperamentally, they were completely unsuited to be in publishing. And other people who found, wait, that thing the person does down the hallway, that's what I want to do. So I would suggest those things. For those of you who have heard about the publishing courses, like the professional courses at NYU or Denver or Columbia, and then there are some like sort of individual courses, but these places have these summer courses that are intensive, like a month or two. I shouldn't say it's not usually a month, it's like 2 months. Certificate programs, they're not cheap, but that certainly is one way to learn more about the industry if that's something that you're interested in. I happened to teach at one, but I was not a student at one. I did not get into the industry that way. And it was weird because I now like end up doing something where I think I'm like none of these students. Like I had none of those advantages they have, but I was able to do it. And most people I know have not been to a publishing course.
I think that's interesting. I want to ask about what's like the place of networking in being able to get a job in publishing? Is it as prevalent, or because I know some industries you want to network more to be able to get into that?
Yeah. Look, I can't imagine not trying to do information interviews in some way, shape, or form. I consider that networking. Yeah. I'm not someone who goes to networking events. I do none of the things that I read about that you're supposed to do. I know that you're all seeing me on screen today. I'm like extremely shy. I'm a homebody. I know I don't do well in those kinds of environments. I don't like cocktail parties. Like I'm the last person on earth who in a networking, like young professionals environment would do well. But I also knew that there were people who worked in publishing, and that if I could get a name for somebody and say, can I have a half an hour of your time? I could ask them about their jobs. And some people from my university who graduated before me were very generous and did that for me. I didn't end up working with any of them. I don't think that any of them did anything beyond that phone call. Like the expectation of information interviewing is not that that person's going to suddenly open a door to a job for you, but I got information. That was kind of key because I learned about what their companies were like or how they got into the industry. And it also kind of taught me some places I didn't think I would thrive. I mean, I really don't think I would have thrived at a good number of places. I don't have sharp elbows. I'm not particularly competitive. I mean, there were all sorts of qualities that I saw and I thought the culture of that place probably wouldn't be right for me based on what this person is saying. But again, beggars can't be choosers. Like anywhere I would have gotten a job, frankly, I would have taken it.
Yeah. Keep the questions coming if you still have more questions. I think we still have time to take more questions.
Sure.
And another thing I would ask is like, what's like the trajectory in the field, in like the industry? So starting as an assistant, like how many years do you think someone can grow from being an assistant to, and what's the next level, something like that?
So it depends what company you're at. If you're at a very, very big company, there are a lot of different gradations. So my title is executive editor. I was an editorial assistant, an assistant editor, an associate editor, an editor, a senior editor, and an executive editor. I have worked on exactly the same list of books the entire time. I am completely weird in that regard. Usually the trajectory is starting as an assistant, maybe getting promoted within the same company, but often going to a different company and learning a different set of kinds of books or a different business or a different part of the business. So most of the time it's kind of lateral moves or moves up that might not be at the same place. And it depends if it's a place, if it's an area where there are a lot of publishers, that's easier to do. If you're in a place where there is just the one publisher in town, then that's a little harder to do. Essentially, you need somebody to leave in order to go into their job. But you can also shift departments or parts of the business. And I think that any place that's big enough, if they see someone who's talented and hardworking and has, let's say, been doing a job for 3 years and they're, junior staff, that they might find another place within the business or hopefully mentor to move into something that will be a growth opportunity, but it's not necessarily a straight ladder. And I would think much more about careers in that way, that there are almost no straight ladders. I mean, people don't tend to start at one place and spend their whole career there. They may start in one thing. And let's say in the world of digital publishing, like I didn't even talk very much about this. Digital publishing, this is huge. Like digital publishing didn't really exist when I started, or it was very, very small part of the business. Now it's a massive part of the business and it's a massive growth industry. So if there are jobs that are opening in digital publishing at a company that you're working at, like that may be a really easy way to move up, but it's not necessarily moving up in the same area that you've been working in. So I don't know about a trajectory anymore because there seem to me so many different trajectories. And I also know people who have spent, 8 years at one press and moved to another. I know people who have jumped around much more than that. And then I'm somebody who hasn't left at all. But that's really, really rare. Most people I know, you learn different things at different companies. You learn about different business models. You learn about different kinds of authors. If you work in publicity, it's often considered easier to jump around because you get experience with working on different types of books. So it's really hard for me to talk about trajectory because mine is so weird. And it's like something out of the 1950s as opposed to what the 21st century world of publishing looks like. And I'll say, the only reason that I have the trajectory I have is because like literally my manager got divorced. He wanted to move out of the city. He left his job. He was a youngish person. I mean, he was in his 30s at that point. He could have held the job for life. And it was only because his whole life changed that there was a job for me. I don't know what I would have done otherwise. I mean, it's sometimes a matter of chance, how these things happen.
I think that's interesting. Let's move to like a more relaxed question, I would say. It is, how would you like describe like the relationship between authors and publishers? What's like the relationship?
Ooh, so there are so many different types of authors.
Okay.
I mean, every person that you work with anywhere is going to be different. I had an author who died last night, and I was writing about this earlier today. I wrote a whole obituary letter to send around to a group of people describing him, who I think I've only met twice. I had such an amazing epistolary relationship with someone that I really don't know, like in person. I have relationships with authors all over the place, and I know things about their lives, about their kids, about their jobs, about their dogs, about their struggles with their books, about when things are going really well, about when they win a big prize, about when their parents die. Like you're a part of their lives, like for better or for worse. And some people have more of a separation between their personal and professional, but most authors do not seem to have that kind of like strict breakdown. Like their editors are part of like their team, or that's how a lot of them see it. We're much more than a business relationship in many cases. Now I may be at one extreme end. A lot of my male friends say my authors don't talk to me about their troubles with their kids, but we all learn a lot about our authors, and yet at the same time we have to make hard business decisions. How many copies of their book are we going to print? How much money are we going to pay them in advance? Like, there are all kinds of difficult things I need to tell them about their texts. Like, this is 40,000 words too long, or this doesn't make any sense, or I got these bad reviews back. I have to get reviews because I work at University Press. So I get peer reviews, anonymous ones. I mean, the authors don't know who the reviewers are. I know who they are, though. And I have to give them bad news, too, or hard news, or things that they don't really want to hear. And I need to figure out ways to say that so that they don't hate me, or maybe they still hate me, but they don't tell me they hate me. And I need to sometimes tell them things that are hard from the company. Like, we just designed this cover. This is what we think the cover of your book should be. You do have some say over it and some input, but at the end of the day, it's a market decision and it's a business decision for the publisher. I don't care that, you know, your best friend thinks that the cover is horrible. Like, we actually have this experience. So there are a lot of different levels of intimacy with authors, and I don't mean about like sleeping with your authors. I just mean about, you know, the ways in which you're embedded in their lives. And they may decide to do their next book with somebody else, but you're still kind of always part of their lives. Like, their paperback might come out, or 10 years later they may come to you and say, I have this student who's really, really great, and I really want you to sign my student's book, or you should look at it, or I need somebody to come to my campus and, like, you know, talk about publishing. So there are all different ways in which authors have become a part of my life. And I think, you know, for the past year, some days I wake up and I'm like, I can't deal with all of them. Like, there's just so much. They're all having problems. They're really stressed out. Their students are, like, you know, all over the place. They don't really, like, the classroom is a weird experience for them. They don't know if they're going to get tenure. Like, all kinds of things are going on with them. And there are definitely mornings when I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, how many of them wrote to me between 11 at night and 5 in the morning? But then there are other days, most days I would say, where I think, I'm so lucky to know these people. Like, they're really interesting people and they write interesting things, and I'm privileged to learn from them. Like, I'm not in grad school anymore, but I learn from all of these authors all the time. And that has been the greatest ongoing education. Now, I know some people who work in disciplines not like history are like, I don't care what they're writing. I don't have the foggiest idea what they're saying. Like, this is so technical and jargony. Like, that's not my thing. But I, as an editor, am able to read and understand the things my authors are writing. So I think there are many different types of publishing, but that's my own relationship with authors. And I think if you can't stand multitasking and working with a lot of different people who all think that their work is the only thing you're doing, then this is not the kind of industry, or I should say editing is not the kind of job for you, because there are other colleagues I work with who are like, all we do is work with people in-house. We don't have to deal with authors at all. And I think, you know, that you can also have a very successful publishing career without working with authors directly.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think I got emotional right there, but like, thank you very much for sharing. I think just with the remaining 2 minutes we have, it would be, how can students reach out to you if they want to or if they need to? Will you be open to?
Yes, I'm going to put my email into the chat box right now. You will probably get an auto reply saying, I got your message. It's only because I'm getting so much email every single day. I will get back to you. I hope I can answer a question. I'm not usually the best resource about, like, if there's a job open at Oxford, like, who is it with? It's a big, big company. But I can definitely answer some specifics, and especially if, you know, somebody has something that they wanted to ask today, but were really shy and didn't want to say in front of everybody, please send it to me.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you very much. I think I have one last question in our last minute. It's just, what is your favorite book that you've, like, published so far? It would just be interesting to know.
Oh, no. No. I've published hundreds of books over 23 years.
I know. Do you have a favorite?
I will say there was an author who was extremely special to me, and her book was really special to me. They're all special, but this one was really, really special. Her name is Peggy Pascoe, and she used to teach at the University of Oregon. She did a book called What Comes Naturally about miscegenation law and about intermarriage in America. All of American history, not just one place, the whole country. It was an extraordinarily ambitious book. She was a hugely generous person. She would read anything for colleagues. She would be on panels. She mentored people. She was just an amazing person. And this book had been under contract for a while. I wasn't the one who had signed it. And it was meant to be a second book that didn't take that long. And every year we would see each other at a conference, and she would say, I don't have it done. I don't have it done. We'd have like a nice chat. And one year we sat down at a conference, and she said, I've been diagnosed with cancer. My book is really important to me. My children are important to me, but I've worked on this book longer than those kids have been alive. And I don't want to die with this book undone. And I'm really incredibly proud of that book. I think it's a really important piece of scholarship. It's important for thinking about America today, even though she died several years ago already. It's a beautiful read because it's about people who loved each other and fought the law to have relationships in a legal sense. And it's a book that won a whole bunch of prizes. So other people in academic, life thought it was important. But for me, I look at that book and I think that was a labor of love, and I helped somebody make that happen. So I guess I'll say that's my favorite, but don't tell any of my other authors, please.
I'll try to make sure they don't find this recording.
Yeah, because I have authors at Tennessee and they can't hear that.
Okay, we'll work on that. Thank you so much, Susan, for sharing. I know that I had a lot of notes. I didn't know about everyone else, but thank you. And thank you all for taking the time to join us today. It was a great time, and I'm really glad that you all joined, and I hope you learned something from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.